Okay, buongiorno. Just want to say, first of all, thank you to Ivan and Alessio for having us again and looking after us so well, feeding us plenty of good food last night. So, my name's Stu and this is Ben. We're both from Climax Studios in the UK. We're here over there. You can come play Returnal, which we made on PS5. Just a little bit about us. Obviously said, we're based in the UK. Currently in a massive period of growth. We've gone from 1 studio to 4 studios in the last 12 months. We're currently at 200 development staff, and we're looking to grow that to 400 or 500 over the next couple of years. So if you want to talk about moving to the UK, working in the UK, come and see us. Christina, my colleagues over here, and Ben. So we're just going to show you our show reel, then I'm going to hand you over to Ben, and he's got a lovely little talk about one of the games we've been involved in.
There we go. Hello, thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit today about our work on Age of Empires. That's one of the most recent kind of games we've released. And I'm going to talk about how we took Age of Empires 4 from the PC version and then we ported it to the console version and we made kind of like a console RTS experience. So a little bit about Climax Studios. So as Stu said, we've been around for about 35 years in the UK. We currently have 4 UK studios. This is the Portsmouth studio here, which I'm the head of, but we've got 4 others. We're about 200 people at the moment. We joined Keywords family in 2021, so that's a big multinational game development company. We've worked on console games, PC games, VR, AR over the years. These are some of the titles we've worked on. And we do full game development, we do co-development, and we do porting. So I'm sure you probably all know about Age of Empires, but I'll tell you a little bit about it anyway. So it's arguably one of the most influential real-time strategy games ever. It's certainly one of the longest running. So it was developed by Relic and published by Microsoft and World's Edge. World's Edge is the Microsoft studio that owns the Age of Empires IP. It's acclaimed for its historical accuracy. It's all set in kind of real-world conflicts. And it's multi-award winning. And another really important thing is it's single player, but it's also got a very big multiplayer kind of community. So how did we get involved in Age of Empires? So the project first kicked off during COVID in November 2020. So normally I put a picture here of me in some exotic location visiting a game development studio, but no, it was from my home office. So initially we were brought on as a small technical team to help out on the PC version. So we were involved working with Relic, doing bug fixing, optimization, rendering. So we like built a new shadow system for them, that kind of stuff. And we also did quite a lot of AI work for them. Anyway, after about maybe a year and a half, Microsoft came to us and they said they wanted to do a console port of Age of Empires. It was going to be a completely separate project. We had to put in a pitch, we had to bid on it, like every other studio. It was extremely competitive to try and win the title. But in the end, because we've done all the work on the PC version, they gave us a project, because it was something they're very, very keen to have a really good job done of. So what did they want? So first of all, they wanted a first-class console experience. So they didn't want a cheap port from the PC version. They didn't want anything that was clunky. It had to feel like it was designed for a console experience, first of all. They wanted full PC parity, so they didn't want it to be simplified in any way. They wanted full PC mod support, so there's a really big mod community with Age of Empires, and they wanted that to come over to the Xbox version. They wanted cross-play with the PC and Xbox version. They wanted a game that was suitable for experienced RTS players. So if you're an Age fan on the PC, they wanted you to be able to come over and really enjoy it and get into it quite deeply. But they also wanted a console game for people who have never touched an RTS before in their life. So quite a few contradictions. And finally, they wanted it to run on an Xbox S series, which is not really a great bit of hardware. So it was pretty tough. So the first thing we did was sort of check out the RTS, the console RTS market. And to be honest, there's not that many great console RTS games out there. The best known is probably Halo Wars. It's definitely the kind of best reviewed. Traditionally, when you get a console RTS title, they simplify the genre, so they make it kind of quite accessible, easy to use with a controller. Sometimes in the extreme. I mean, I love Pikmin, but it's not Age of Empires. So we also looked at C&C, the Lord of the Rings RTS games, and some quirky ones like Tooth and Nail. But in the end, we found there was no previous attempt that matched the scale of Age of Empires 4 or that kind of vision of a console-first experience. So, I mean, this is pretty typical for a port timeline, but this is how we tackled Age of Empires. So first of all, you have to start very narrow. You haven't got it running on the console, so you can't do a lot of work at the same time. And basically, you're rushing to get to what's called first light. So that's the first time you get it running on the console, and then you can really start doing work. Up to that point, design are working on paper, art are kind of researching things, and the code are just trying to get it compiling and running. So in some ways, this was relatively simple. So PC to Xbox, it's all Microsoft, it's all DirectX. It's not too tough. So we already found they had some groundwork in the engine. So Relic had done some Xbox code, which was really helpful. And we got to first light a little after a month, which is almost unheard of. It's really, really quick to get to that initial stage. But that's when the good news stopped. So let's talk about some of the issues we faced. So Age of Empires is built in a fully bespoke engine. It's not Unreal, it's not Unity. It's extremely complex. There's loads of historic code in there going back years. Had an insane build system. You know, it would take days to get a build out of it. We couldn't run it locally. It had to be run on a machine in Relic. It was crazy. It had probably the most insane UI system I've ever come across in my 25 years of game development. Just absolutely, it took weeks to get anything into the UI. And obviously it evolved over many iterations and years. It's not very optimal. It's designed for PCs. And of course, it's not at all suited to controllers. There was no controller thought in at all. So the first thing we did was kind of tackle the user experience. And we got a list of all the actions you can do in Age of Empires. And there's a lot of them. I mean, an awful lot of them. It's like, I can leave that running for ages, but yeah, pages and pages of kind of interactions you can do. So we were like, how on earth do we get this working on a console controller? So what we did is we took each control in turn, and a control could be something as simple as move the camera, could be something as complicated as build a specific unit. And then we did a quick brainstorm of what a console equivalent might look like on a controller. And then we used a tool called the UX pyramid, which you may have seen before. So basically, you can rank all these controls, more important ones down the bottom, more kind of polish at the top. And then we used Figma to prototype to try and see how it felt when you were doing it on the console with a controller. And our aim was low APM. So that's our metric. That stands for actions per minute. So whatever you are trying to do in the game, you want to keep the number of button presses, menu selections down to as minimum as possible. So we used radial menus. They're not ideal, really. They're not the best solution, but there's a precedent for it in Age of Empires. There's a precedent for it in RTS games. So they were used in Age 2 on the console, I believe. But we found Age 4, it was just too big. The menus were too deep for a very, very simple approach. So you would end up going radial menu, like 4 or 5 levels deep. So in the end, we had to build a kind of contextual smart system that reduced the amount of deep radial menus that you had to interact with. So this was quite a lot of work. I talked a little bit about Figma, so here's some example Figma screen. It's really great for prototyping. I'd recommend you use it if you've got to do anything like this. It allowed us to quickly test what worked. Implementation into the engine was extremely time-consuming, as I mentioned, so we only wanted to do it once. So some of the technical UI challenges, as I said, it was an insane UI system. It's based off XAML. It's the worst I've ever seen. Don't quote me on that. So we had to design the screens in a Microsoft tool called Blend. You basically had to program the code twice for each screen, once for the editor, then once for the game. It had no documentation at all. And from our initial pitch, our UI team ended up being 5 times what we estimated. That's the kind of level of extra effort it took to get the UI systems working. Next, I'll talk a little bit about performance. So when we first got it running, the CPU usage was 10 times over budget. Sometimes the simulation tick took seconds to finish, which for an RTS, that's not very real time. The main and render thread were 2 to 3 times over budget. and GPU was 2 times over budget. And this was all on the lowest quality settings, and we were looking for hitting at least mid quality. Yeah, this was a great one. Loading times were up to 15 minutes for a level. So the other big issue is memory. The Xbox S has 5 gig that you can use. The game was designed for a minimum of 8 gig with 2 gig VRAM and a page file on the hard disk. Again, for minimum quality, and we were aiming higher. And this was one of the biggest problems. Fitting it in memory on an Xbox S was really touch and go right up to the release date. So I'm not going to get too technical, but I'm briefly going to go through a quick optimization to show you the kind of stuff we did. If you're not a programmer, feel free to zone out. So you have 3 threads in Age of Empires. You have a render thread, simulation thread, and a main thread. At the start of the game, they're all being allocated 1 gig of memory each. And what happened was the simulation thread updated, and then it copied that simulation data to the other threads. So this worked quite well on PC, but it's extremely wasteful if you don't have a page file. That's 3 gig of memory just sat there. You can't put it on disk. It's just taking up your memory all the time. So what did we do? So we used virtual address spaces on the Xbox. This basically lets you allocate a range of memory, but you don't have to back that with physical memory. Memory was only committed when we needed it. So committed is when you take a bit of virtual memory and you say, here's a bit of physical memory that it represents. The blocks were lazily decommitted when they weren't used to free up memory, so we kept the constant memory usage low. And the other really important thing is it allowed us to share physical memory blocks between different threads. So that avoided us having to copy the same data between different threads. And this particular optimization, it took 3 gig of memory usage and it reduced it to 200 megabytes. And that's the kind of level of optimization we had to hit to get this working on the Xbox. Yeah, just quickly, we added some new content. So we had an entirely new tutorial campaign. It was set around the rise of William the Conqueror. It's very close to a lot of English men's hearts. Boo! So this was aimed at ramping up and retaining console players that were new to the genre. It kept to the historic narrative, so it fit with the game well. I mentioned before cross-play. It's quite important. This is really, really difficult. Interestingly, it wasn't technically difficult on this title because Relic owned all the servers. It was all Microsoft, so there were no technical issues. The issue is matchmaking. So you have an idea of ranked tiers. You want to play against people who are the same sort of level. But how do you do that between console players who are using a controller, PC players, but still keep the wait times low? So this was really a tricky problem to solve, mainly a design problem. So we didn't actually make this for launch, but we did all the design, we did all the groundwork, gave it to Relic, and then they implemented it finally, I think, a couple of months after launch. Another big issue, mod support. So the PC mod scene is really extensive. You can do whatever you want, effectively. There's no restrictions on the amount of units, the amount of memory you use, the performance implications. So how do we do this on Xbox S? Basically, we took the most popular mods, we tested them, we tweaked the engine to make sure they worked really, really well, and we gave them a big tick and said, supported mod. Everything else, we took a pragmatic approach, basically put a big warning message up saying, this might crash your game, but give it a go. I'll talk a little bit about focus testing. So this gives you an idea of the level of focus testing you need for a kind of AAA release. So we had 3 batches. First one was quarter 2, 2022. This was an external company that would do it for us. They basically said, yeah, you're broadly on the right track. However, there are serious caveats about potentially intractable approachability hurdles, which, yeah, not very good. Clumsy unit building. It was quite damning, to be honest. So fast forward to quarter 4. So, right, okay, this one's going to be better. They said, oh yeah, it's improved, but the obstacles presented in the interface and re-tutorialization are so significant that were the game released in anything close to the current state, Microsoft would risk serious damage to the entire Age of Empires brand. I mean, that feels worse to me. So, yeah, that was a little bit kind of disheartening. But we did a load of rework, we took all their feedback on board, and then we had the final one, quarter 2, and it was much more positive. Game controls UI have undergone major improvements, presentational polish, actions per minute greatly improved on gamepad. So I think we really got there in the end, but this is quite typical of any game development. If it's AAA, it will go through rounds and rounds of focus testing like this. As well as the external company, we had constant internal play testing. So for Microsoft, this is called flight testing. They basically give it to Microsoft employees, they give it to people signed up to their insider program, and you get a video at the end of the day. You get a video of someone playing the game, struggling on something. So it's kind of quite high level, but it's interesting. So overall, how much work was it to get this out? So this was 2.5 years in total development from start to finish. We had 39 people at peak, and we were at peak nearly all of the time, so it was quite a heavy team. So this is a general breakdown, 57% coders, 20% artists. Out of the coders and artists, a large proportion was UI, as I mentioned. The rest were optimization. 10% QA. Obviously, we had Microsoft QA to help us as well. And the rest were design and then production, audio, that kind of thing. So quite a lot of work for a port. So the important question is, how did we do in the end? So these are some actual quotes. Age of Empires 4 on Xbox works beautifully. It's hard to believe, but Age of Empires 4 works perfectly on Xbox consoles. So, you know, overall, we were super happy with the kind of press we got. Very pleasing. And I'll probably just leave you with one more quote, which is kind of sums up the project for me. As someone who has played both the PC and Xbox versions, I'm beyond delighted to say that the Xbox version is better. Yes, I said better. And if you don't believe it, here are the Metacritic reviews, beating the PC version. So, I mean, you can't ask for more than that. So, thank you very much. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask now or grab us later.